Hello, welcome to David Eames On Your Mind, a conversation between friends about mental health issues. Hello, and welcome to David Eames On Your Mind, our regular weekly podcast about psychological issues, mental health issues. As always, I'm joined by the lovely Owen Oxley and Mikey Monk. Now, the observant amongst you may notice that Mikey looks a bit altered today.
Altered?
He says it's a result of some boxer size. I'm not convinced. I think it might have been a domestic, but who knows? But we may or may not cover that in our subject today, which is boundaries. So, what does the word boundaries mean to you, Mikey?
I suppose that does become very relevant, doesn't it? Because it was boxing, I promise you that. And I kept my guard down, unfortunately, for this time. But I had a sparring partner. And I have a guy who's a professional who goes to Shinfield's gym, which is the only professional in the area. And he's really we've set our boundaries together. And you know what sparring really should be like. It's sort of jabbing, tapping, working each other out. And he adheres to that plan. He sticks to it. But there was a guy today who has just been watching sessions and enjoying what we're doing and asked if he could be involved in it. And you sort of set the intentions and you set your boundaries up. But we were sparring and I was sort of tapping and just teaching him little bits and bobs, but he was getting quite frustrated and flustered with it. So I think eventually in round 5, he decided, do you know what? I'm going to show him I can punch, and that isn't what sparring's about whatsoever. It's not about ego and masculinity and all of that thing, toxic masculinity. It's about practice and learning and figuring each other out and problem solving. So our boundaries were there, but our boundaries were broken. So what
smashed.
do I do? Yeah, smashed to pieces. So what do I do about that, David?
Yeah, well, it has parallels with banter, doesn't it? You know, the verbal sparring that goes on, and then somebody just wades in with something that's way over the top.
Yeah. And even as a comic relief when someone does it and they just drop a bombshell, you're like, oh. And you know when it wasn't even 80s cool or 90s cool, you're like, dude, you're taking it back to the 70s.
Did you see Kanye West when he was next to, who's Austin Powers, but Mike Myers, isn't it? I'm not going to say exactly what he said, but he was like, Donald Trump doesn't like a certain type of people. And he just stood there and it all went silent. Everyone's like, what is that? I think he broke the boundaries for that BBC. It wouldn't be BBC, would it? But that show.
No.
So what's your understanding of the word boundaries, Owen, from a sort of mental health point of view?
From a mental health point of view, it's, for me, I suppose it's the level of comfort or discomfort that you can fine-tune with a certain person or group. And when I say that, as you well know, I'm quite outspoken and loud, and I can be quite noisy and all the rest of it. But I have to switch. And people used to use this phrase a lot at Egg, wearing different hats. And the problem is I don't like to pretend. So I think that I have got a base level of my own boundaries with other people that close inner circle people know that you'll get the complete true me, no hat at all. And then there's other areas where you have to just be... It's more conscious of someone else's comfort level, because some people don't like to talk about or even approach certain subjects and all the rest of it. And unfortunately, sometimes you will break a boundary without even knowing it. Recently, I had we're having some work done on the house, and there was a guy that came in, and he was an electrician that was employed by another third party, and it was near Christmas. And he started telling me that he'd already told his children about the secret, the big super secret around Christmas about Santa, and they were 6 and 8, and I was kind of fuming, but low-key fuming. I couldn't really kick off at him, but then he was insistent on preaching to me about religion. And the problem was that made it even worse, because my opinions and his opinions are completely different. It wasn't a conversation that I was looking for. It wasn't one that I wanted to get engaged in. But then I was sort of pulled into this thing. And part of me, because he had come into this because he felt that he was not righteous to do so, but he felt like it was his place to say this and put this opinion across, that the boundaries in his opinion, or it seemed to me, were not there. He was like, well, I'm going to tell you. And I think that's his level of comfort was fine because that's what he's into, but he wasn't aware of how I was feeling or if I was even interested in this. And I think at that point, that's when then my twat switch turns on a little bit, and I think I'm gonna upset you now. I'm gonna embarrass you, and I think it's a defensive mechanism. I've got a massive defensive mechanism that I don't get embarrassed easy, and when someone tries to, I think, okay, no worries. You've opened the gate. I'm gonna smash you back through it. So yeah, it's a difficult one for me. It's a bit of a seesaw.
Which might be an indication, actually, that you have some issues with boundaries.
Quite possibly.
Because I think it is a very key issue from a mental health point of view. It's like being able to say no, being able to be assertive. It's something I work a lot with clients. It's very important. The whole assertiveness thing is really important because people often equate assertiveness with aggression, and they're different things. Actually, being assertive is a way of avoiding being aggressive.
Yeah.
What you're talking about there, Owen, is flipping into aggression.
Yes.
Because you've not been able to say no. That's not a line I'm prepared to cross.
Yeah, that's great that you said that.
Yeah.
Or I find myself already in the deep end, and I'm like, I came in to make a cup of tea. Before you know it, we're talking about religion and Santa and all this stuff, and literally, it's kind of suffocated me before I've even put the kettle on. So I understand the assertive element where it's like, if you start, Jesus, I don't want to talk about that. No, stop. And that's not how I am. But at the same time, it's really interesting to me how some people think it's all right to talk about this and it's not all right to talk about that. Like, there's the big thing at the minute, like, with guns in school in America, and they were on about it the other day, and there's a big thing about drag acts in America have been banned from going into schools. Right.
I've seen it.
But the whole gun thing, and you think, this is bonkers. And obviously I'm not going to get into all that, but it's kind of insane when you can have these opinions of things which are insanity when they're compared against the reality of the world.
I've got a question then, David, in sort of that context. Could you give somebody maybe some language or how to confront that situation where you're being assertive to say, listen, mate, I really don't want to talk that, and how you could make that situation better rather than bubbling up and letting that anger come through?
Well, it's simple, but it's also very difficult if people aren't used to doing it.
Yeah.
And again, there are so many things bound up with this about self-esteem and how we view ourselves in the world, whether or not we know we're okay, or whether we're looking for other people to tell us we're okay, whether we've got kind of a people-pleasing approach to things, or whether we've got that sort of personal, sort of emotional integrity of really, well, I don't really care what the world thinks. I don't want to upset people, but I know who I am. And if you're able to work on that, then just being able to say, no, that's not something I'm prepared to do. It's not something I want to talk about. It's not an opinion I share.
Communication comes in key here, doesn't it?
Yeah, but it comes down from that belief that you're going to be listened to, and that you have a right to express your opinion. And people can often worry with that. I think that the issues with boundaries are a key for many people because they feel imposed on by others.
Yeah.
Family are asking them to do things, making demands of them, and they feel they can't say no. Well, they're going to get upset, not realising that that's about the other person's boundaries.
Yes.
That upset belongs to them.
Yeah. I heard this on a podcast the other day, and I think this is probably a commonality for lots of people, particularly couples, but where the partner feels insecure and doesn't really want the girl often, but the other partner to go out, or just often in my experience. But then laying them boundaries, where does it cross over and become controlling and manipulative? Because maybe there's an element of, I don't want you going out in a thong, but not going out and seeing your mates, that feels really sinister and manipulative to me. So where is that conversation and crossover?
Well, I think it's quite good to think about how would it feel if it was applied the other way around.
Yeah.
I don't want you to go out seeing your mates. Well, how would you feel if you were being asked the same thing?
Yeah.
It's suppose some guys or some people just don't have friends, so they don't live that experience where when they get in a relationship and somebody's really close to their family and loved ones and friends, and they may grow some resentment to that. So then they start trying to impose their lifestyle onto others because they don't live that lifestyle.
Well, ultimately, if the person you're with isn't listening to those things and not at all respecting your boundaries, then are you with the right person? You know, this whole thing, I mean, what happened to you, that punch in the face you got, was a little bit about that guy's boundaries and your boundaries.
Yeah.
So maybe you were crossing his boundaries, humiliating him a bit with your skill compared to his, and maybe say you asked for it.
Yeah, I know, completely.
In one sense there, he was out of order, and it would have been better for him to say, Mikey, this is not going the way I want it to go.
Yeah.
Rather than bursting out with a punch.
Often the simple approach is the last one we find, or is the one that you come across together or whatever. Because a lot of the times, what I find is kind of frustrating is I always assume, which is completely wrong, I know, I always assume how someone should react to something I've done, or how I'd want them to feel, or if I'd done something and I'd spoke to you, like, I've done it before, I've embarrassed my wife or my kids because I've been in a shop and I've shouted something. Like, shout, I'm over here, or something like that. And to them, that's terrible.
Yeah.
They don't want the attention. They hate that. But I assume that they will take it how I would take it, because if someone shouted me like that, that's not a problem. And for me, it's more about learning and understanding that everyone's feelings are relevant. Even if you think, that's fucking stupid, that's insane, it's not for them. Everyone else's reality is equally as terrifying as your own reality, or is equally as comfortable. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I saw a lecture by an American psychologist over 30 years ago now, and he was talking about management techniques, and he said that the golden rule, do unto others as you will be done by, should be written as to do unto others as they would be done by.
Yes.
And, you know, if you're managing someone, to understand, you know, whether they're someone who's very direct or very indirect. And some people say, you just say, you know, get on and do it. For others, it's, hey, let's work out a plan together.
Well, precisely.
And it's that, you know, being aware of your own boundaries, being aware of other people's boundaries as well, and respecting them.
Well, really, as an easy example, when we would work together, I mean, I know how I feel I can be easy to work with. For a lot of people, it blew their mind. With me and David, I would sit and I'd say, draw something, and he would make a scribble. Really very simple. I want it to look like this. Off you go. And because he left me to it and treated me like an adult, I would go and I would do my hardest, and I'd try my hardest and I'd do my best. And I'd come back, and very often he'd go, that's shit. But
maybe not in those exact words.
I bet it was.
It's pretty much those words. And the thing is, that's because of our banter boundaries, our friendship boundaries, our personalities boundaries, which is all good. And I know that if the person that was sat next to me had gone and shown him, and he would have felt the same thing, I know he wouldn't have been able to say that shit. He would have had to give constructive feedback to be able to essentially, and this is another horrible corporate term of a shit sandwich. So we're going to tell you what's bad, then we're going to tell you what's good, then we're going to give you a little bit of feedback. No, that shit, make it better. No worries, dude. And it is fine-tuning all of those things, and I think...
But it was only half the story, because it might have been that shit, but it was also, you can do better.
This is what I mean.
And when you did do better, it was, that's right.
Yes, because then I can look at it myself and go, oh my God. I've got the same thing at the moment with my youngest. She's 11, she's being really creative, she's getting into drawing. And because I will sketch something with her, and I'm not the best artist by any stretch, but I will sketch something, and I'm trying to say to her, all art is art. Just keep going. Always keep trying. Just keep trying. And she gets really anxious and frustrated, and it's got to be perfect. So she's got this little perfectionist gene in her, but at the same time, it's making her head go fuzzy because she can't concentrate on even practicing the first time. And what I'm trying to say to her is, look, everyone starts somewhere. Just keep going. And I think sometimes it's those kind of things where it's working out how to manage those with an individual, because like with me, you could say that's shit, and I'll think, well, I'll show him. Whereas I'll say to Libby, that's shit, and she'll go and cry in bed for an hour. So I'm not going to do that. And obviously, it is it's such a fine balance throughout everything. And I mean, at the minute we're going away, work's busy, everything's busy. We've got so much stuff on. I've just had to sell my car, buy a new car. Sometimes you don't always understand what's going off with someone else. That where you would normally feel comfortable with a bit of banter, someone can sometimes snap and react and act a lot different to how they would normally react. You think, what the fuck? But I think that's the case where it's okay to ask or to approach and just make sure your nearest and dearest are actually okay. Because
But if you've got that awareness again of other people's boundaries, is that you get it wrong sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's being able to back out of it rather than
Yeah.
double down on it.
Yeah. Because you do get yourself into a bit of a hole then, and then you're like, well, I'm here now, so I may as well just be here. It's to have that strength to go, do you know what? I'm really sorry. I was out of line there.
Yeah.
I've disrespected all your boundaries in that moment, and I'm going to come back here. God, you save some days, don't you, doing that?
even just apologising,
Yeah.
just to be able to say, sorry, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not a problem.
Sometimes Sue and I will have an exchange which is less than ideal.
Yeah.
And it might be because of other stuff going on.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always need to be talked out either.
No.
Because we've both kind of got it wrong and we just move
Yeah.
past it. You have 20 minutes cool down maybe,
Yeah.
and then come back and you're okay. Don't have to talk it through. Sometimes you get things so wrong you do need to talk it through.
Yeah. I think it's understanding what is going off with someone else sometimes. And that is so key. I'm not saying that you have to have someone's timetable and everything logged down to go, that looks stressful. But the problem is, you know, when you work with someone or you live with someone or you interact with someone, that they've done something day in, day out that they make it look easy. Doesn't mean it is easy. So you know before you know it, when you take for granted, oh yeah, well you're doing the school run and then you're going to do this. And it's like, yeah, well you didn't know there's 3 new sets of traffic lights and they forgot their PE kit and there's this and there's that. So before you know it, the anxiety's already building and your list hasn't stopped yet. And do you know what I mean? You know that kind of spiral, because you're meant to just get on with it.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's all right to just talk or explain or sort of, even if you say, I just feel a bit frazzled. Like, your boundaries are there, but they can change every now and again depending on how you feel it.
I suppose a question for you, Owen, is how did you find boundary setting as being a parent? Because I've got to go through that, and I'm
Terrifying.
already struggling.
Terrifying. It's extremely difficult because I am quite a sensitive person, and I have a fantastic relationship with the girls. It was way better when they were small because they looked up to me and adored me, and I was their everything, as they were my everything.
And then they learnt something about you.
And there you go. And because they are now
Saw him on the
becoming,
game to you on a weekend.
that's it. But because they're now becoming small, independent people, what you have to remind yourself is you've created a miniature version of you. And I didn't want to hang out with my mom at 11, 12, 13, 14. And I didn't. And I was, to be fair, I was doing a lot more further afield independently, which I would be terrified if my kids were going to Derby on their own at 11. But that's what I was doing. And it's the problem is I get so far inside my own head and I make the problem about myself, because the fact of having someone come and cuddle into you or give you love or attention or just wanting to be with you is easy to take for granted because it's the most wonderful thing. Whereas when you literally, like at the minute, Mel get up for school, she comes down and we get in the car, she doesn't want to talk to anyone, off she goes. When she comes in, I'm like, all right, darling, you had a good day? She's like, I'm really tired. That's literally our conversations. But then if she needs me, I'm there. So if she needs anything, I'm there. And I took her to, we went to the MacArthur Glen outlet the other day because we're going on holiday. And she was the most talkative she's ever been. And the problem is, I had to do everything I could in my brain to go, just enjoy it, shut the fuck up, don't ruin it, just listen. And that's all it is. And everyone I speak to says, she'll come back, she'll be fine, which is fine. But it hurts in the interim, if that makes sense. So you kind of got to let them be.
What about when other parents are letting their boundaries are very different to where your boundaries are, and say their kids can be out till 10 o'clock here, and you're like, 7 o'clock sounds better.
It's difficult
It's a
because
challenge.
yeah, and I mean we've got some of her friends. Their parents are they've got to do rugby, tennis, piano lessons, guitar lessons. They've got to do all of this stuff. And then there's other ones which are saying, all right, well, your options, we've chosen your options because IT is the only way forward. There's no money in being a vet. There's no money in being a nursery, and not making decisions for them. And I think I had a good childhood. Stace had a decent childhood, but it was very much focused on what are you going to do when you're older. And this pressure that's still on top of me now at 40, nearly 42, is what do you want to be? And I kind of still don't know. And I've never failed in what I've done. I've always enjoyed what I've done, but it's difficult when there's no need for that pressure. So what we try and do is just encourage them to be happy. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I'm not
completely.
saying that, oh, well, vaping at 12-year-olds make you happy, so crack on. I'm not saying that's the case, but we don't hold anything back. We don't hide anything from them. I'm very open when I talk to them about anything, drugs, alcohol, you name it. If it's religion, if it's racism or sex or anything, I will never hold back. I'll just talk to them in a normal way. But it's, I mean, I saw it when I was a lot younger. Our neighbours, they were extremely religious. They didn't have TV in the house. It was all very much about the God Squad, that was their prerogative. But they weren't allowed to play with toy guns, and they weren't allowed to listen to Michael Jackson's Thriller, and there were so many elements that they were stopped from.
Yeah.
That as they turned 15, 16,
It became wild.
Yeah, and this is a thing where
insane.
if children are too controlled, and I've seen this with the results in adulthood, is that people don't learn to control their own boundaries. And then once the constraints come off and they go away to college or whatever, leave home, then drug and alcohol problems often abound because they've not learnt self-restraint.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the whole thing about the parenting is a way that there's so much guilt around that if you get to the end of the day and the children are still alive and largely undamaged, it's been a good day.
Big time.
Yeah.
And as long as they feel loved, then that's okay. And it's about you've got to be the grown-up. That's all.
Yeah.
That when you want to get frustrated with them, realise that they don't know how to manage their emotions, and hopefully you do.
Yeah.
So again, children's boundaries are very elastic, shall we say.
Yeah.
They don't really exist. And part of the process of maturing, as well as developing resilience, is learning what their personal boundaries are.
It helps growing you as a person as well, as you're trying to work out all that and find the nuances within their boundaries, because sometimes you can have very strict and absolute ideas in your head, but as you're like, I don't know if that actually works, and it helps you become a bit more elastic in your mentality.
Yeah. See, part of the whole boundaries thing is autonomy. That thing that we make our own choices in life, and again, encouraging a young person's autonomy is a good thing for them to make positive choices for themselves rather than following rigid rules that you're imposing. And again, being able to manage your own boundaries in that way, which I wasn't always able to do because my parents were too restraining when I was growing up. As a 14, 15-year-old, I had to be in by 9 o'clock. So that meant I had to get into trouble earlier.
Yeah.
Because it's
Get as much down you as possible.
the thing that you want, like with your believing neighbours.
Yeah.
That you don't want your kids to be the weird kid. The one that all the kids are talking about, the new program on TV, and they're not allowed to watch TV.
Mate, this is it.
It excludes them then as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
And I think it's almost like a spider chart for me, that I've got my own boundaries, and then there's an offshoot, which is now my children, even down to my dogs. Because, obnoxious dogs can be, but two of my dogs can walk off the lead, and they're the most pleasant, respectful dogs. And there's another one that's a little aggro bastard. That essentially, I'm not apologising for him all the time, but I'm working on him more than I'm having to work on the others and it doesn't affect me personally, but I can see that it's affecting other people, and I don't want that to be the case. But the biggest thing where the spider chart branches off for my kids is because obviously they are forever developing their boundaries and learning a brand new world all the time. The biggest element or the biggest part is I want them to always know that they can come back. There's no judgment regardless of what's happened. And I think that is the door is so wide open there is no boundary, because I got into a lot of trouble as a kid, and the last person I would have thought to ring was my mum. I might have rang my dad, but there's not a chance I was ringing my mum. Whereas Moo, well, she tripped up the other day, and the first thing she did was ring her mum, sorted it out, and got her home. I got in from work. Stacey already spoke to her. I got in. She told me everything that had happened. I went upstairs to talk to her. I went, "What are you telling me?" And she went, "Oh God, don't." I said, "Dude, what are you doing?" And it wasn't another bollocking, and we didn't double down on it. It was just more understanding that she could break down how she'd done this thing in the day and like got to where she got to. I was like, "Mate," and she's like, "I know." I went, "Cool, all good?" And she was like, "Yeah." And I was thinking, look, that's all it needs to be, because it's not that I'm pushing her further away or treading on her harder to make her feel like she's worse, because a lot of the times, the worst you can feel is yourself. Someone else doesn't need to make it worse. So I think with that side of things, it's encouraging them to understand that the boundaries are there to support each other. Does that make sense?
Well, again, it's about recognising the autonomy of everyone you're relating to. We're all individuals.
Yeah.
You know, one of my favourite all-time movie gags is from The Life of Brian, where he's shouting, "You don't all have to follow me," and they say, "You're all individuals," and they're all chanting, "We're all individuals."
Yeah.
And one guy goes, "I'm not."
Classic.
That is a classic.
But we are all individuals, and it's that, you know, like with children moving into teenage years, it's often difficult that their boundaries change. They want more privacy than they did before. And, you know, parents can be thinking, hang on, well, this has changed. This is not how you were. Well, yeah, people's boundaries change. Their requirements change. But they have the right to do that.
Yeah.
If they're not imposing or breaching your boundaries, then they have the right to express that. And I think that's really important to recognise that. And valuing other people in that way, because they don't always value themselves. This is a tricky thing, is that, okay, we want to be able to learn to be able to express our own boundaries and stay within them, but people sometimes need more help with that than others.
Yeah.
When setting boundaries, though, and then you've given somebody, "This is where I stand," how important is it to carry those boundaries out? You know, if you just always being a walkover or people pleaser and you're constantly stretching it out, then it's so false. So how do you get people to stand in their power, in their boundaries?
Well, in the end, you're the only person you've got any hope of having any control over.
I like that.
You
Yeah.
know? So if other people are breaching your boundaries on a regular basis, it's about thinking about how you feel about that relationship.
Yeah.
For a teenager, for instance, with a parent breaching their boundaries, that's tricky because there's not much escape.
Yeah.
And again, you know, I've worked with clients who the first chance they got, they escaped and moved away as far as they could because of parents constraining things too much. So it's that, what are the long-term consequences of that if you're not respecting other people's boundaries? But we can only control ourselves. And if you're with someone who's constantly breaching those boundaries, is that the right person to be with?
Yeah.
Or are your boundaries, you know, do they need resetting? That's another thing to think about.
Yeah.
Am I being unreasonable in the boundaries that I'm setting? That you're never allowed a drink, or you must always drink until you fall under the table.
Yeah.
You know, that are they appropriate? Is it fair to impose our will on others?
Yeah.
Again, you know, respecting autonomy is a key thing.
I think it's being able to have an open conversation as well sometimes, because sometimes you have a difference of an opinion or you have a different outlook on things, and it doesn't always mean that one's wrong or one's right. And it's such an interesting world at the minute, because obviously everything's developing so quick and there's so many new different things you can try and get into, that it doesn't necessarily mean that everything is bad or everything is good. And I think the more you can talk to someone about something, or just have even if it's between you and your partner or you and your kids, it's just getting an understanding of how you all feel, because it's really easy to assume stuff, and it's really easy to just get mad. And the problem is, getting mad, it just doesn't essentially help anything. No. Yeah, you get that very brief, I've had a go, but then there's the guilt and the frustration and the upset that comes afterwards. That sometimes it's all right to talk. It's all right to just break it down and have a conversation.
Yeah. And it's okay to disagree, because many things are subjective. You know,
precisely.
I often say a good wine is one you enjoy. It doesn't matter what the critics say.
Yeah.
Culture is just culture. There's no high or low culture. whether you're into EastEnders or Shakespeare, it doesn't matter.
No.
Some people might say there's a qualitative difference, but I know a lot of effort goes into making EastEnders.
Mate, this is it.
Yeah.
It's a different kind of quality.
God, the amount of people that make people feel bad on what they watch or what they listen to, and
Yeah.
give them.
Well, really, that's about their own insecurities.
Yeah,
They want
yeah,
to feel
yeah.
better about
Insecurity.
themselves.
But I
Yeah.
see them conversations happen, and I think just let them be. Let them enjoy what they enjoy.
Yeah.
Don't have to be so impactful on who you are.
Yeah, but at the same time, it's okay to say, well, I think that's shit, but hey, if you
Yeah,
like
yeah,
it,
yeah.
that's fine. Doesn't make you any the less because you like it.
Simpsons is the best, though.
There you go. It's your opinion.
What catapult? Have you always?
You've got a bit of a Simpsons lip coming
I
there.
know.
You've got a massive Homer Simpson lip.
What helped you with boundary setting? Have you always been good with it, or becoming a dad? Did it help you and catapult you into it, or was it being self-employed? Because I know you spoke about can you justs before, and a lot of people asking, "Oh, could you just do this? Could you just do that?"
Yeah.
When did you start to become? Oh, boundaries are really important for me in my life.
Well, partly with working with was obviously I'm quite fortunate of being David's friend for the past 15 years because he's been counselling me without me knowing. So it's like a stealth
Cheers,
counsel.
David.
And obviously my wife, I've been with Stacey since I was 16. So the thing is, your true closest friends and family and partners are the ones that they see all. And sometimes it's what you take from a bad experience. It could be a job that you've had for 5 years that ultimately turned out to be a bad experience that you think, I probably shouldn't have done that. And it's what will build you to then hopefully make that decision a little bit quicker in the next job and the next job and the next job. Because, yeah, like I was saying, being a creative is very easy in other people's opinions because it's not a physical thing that you're selling or doing. So if you have a leak and you call the plumber and he said, all right, it's 1,500 quid. You just believe him.
Yeah,
And you
yeah,
pay
yeah,
that
yeah.
because the leak was there before and it's gone now. You want me to create you a brand identity that potentially could make you millions of pounds. There's nothing at the moment, but potentially it could be millions of pounds. It's not going to cost that though because it's Photoshop. And you think, well, no, because I'm still working and it's giving you a bit of self-worth. But at the same time, it's understanding how much you invest in someone, either that's time, effort, energy, or whatever it is, because ultimately, and I used to get mad that I hadn't set a boundary, I hadn't set these parameters, and then I get mad when they kept pushing for more. That's my own fault. Does that make sense?
Yeah, completely.
And I think that kind of within life, as far as kids and family and all the rest of it, and what's it, you just learn on the fly. I don't think there's no point reading a book per se. I'm not saying you shouldn't read a book, but there's no. If you look at books as in what my mum would have read, what my auntie would have read, what my wife would have read, they're always all different. So yeah, there's the fundamentals of making sure that your kids survive, but then there's also the elements where you just have to see what happens.
I'm not sure if I subscribe to that view that there's no point in reading a book. I've read quite a few and
Yeah,
I found them quite
that's
beneficial.
what I mean. I'm not saying that there's no point reading a book or overall, but I
Give
mean,
me a license, and I was like, yes, I don't need to read books.
but you look at when you were a baby and the book your mum would have read different to then your sister's book, and then they're always all different.
Yeah.
Like even when we had our first daughter, and I was burping her, it was a pat on the back, okay, hand under the chin, pat on the back. Within 4 years, when we had Libby, it was, oh no, you have to do this rubbing motion. The hand's not under the chin. They have to, and it's what works.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, I'm really, I've not got Tourette's, but I will swear, I'm loud, and the kids know that. They're used to that. They hear that if there's music with explicit lyrics or whatever, they hear it, but they don't walk around swearing, and it's not. And I think it's because of my experience of growing up with neighbours that were so sheltered that it's not like it's an orgy all the time that they're walking around going, oh, that's normal. But the normality is everyday life.
Your kids have been conditioned by having an embarrassing dad.
Precisely.
You know, so,
Precisely.
well,
Which
yeah.
it is for them. It's massively, well,
Yeah.
for Millie, massively embarrassing. Massively. Whereas for Libby, she loves it. But she's still a bit younger.
Yeah.
But we went on holiday and I got called onto the stage. We're in Mallorca, and it was one of the shows, one of the nights, and there was these two fellas, and it was basically like just an ad-lib show. and a big pirate show, and they're doing all this thing. And so they always make eye contact with me. I think,
Yeah.
here we fucking go. So they call me up on stage. The next minute, I'm in a bra,
But
pants.
he's loving it, isn't he? He's
Mate,
so happy.
Oh,
with
yeah.
The
that.
problem is, I kind of not bothered anymore. I've
Yeah,
done
yeah.
it. I've been there. It's fine, and I'm done. Where I can make my peace with it, and I'm more conscious that my eldest is now dying with
Yeah.
embarrassment. But I think I've got to push on through because she might just see the other side and be like, "Oh, actually, it's all right." But she
yeah.
didn't, and she was so devastated.
Mortified.
But everyone at the complex then, we had the best holiday. Everyone
Yeah,
knew us.
yeah.
We was all talking, and it was lovely. But I've got to be aware of how she feels about that. But before you know it, I've swept up into the thing. Same thing. I'm back in the deep end, and it's already happened before I can
There
apologise.
is an element in what you're saying there as well, where you do have to be conscious of everyone else, but then you can't just stifle yourself. If you really enjoyed being up there, and that's who you are as a person, there's a certain degree where you've got to be yourself as well and allow
Well,
yourself to.
the line from Hamlet, above all, to your own self be true. And this is the whole thing of acting with integrity. And again, awareness of your own boundaries really helps to do that. You know who you are. So if you've got customers making what feel like unreasonable demands, it's about recognising what your choices are about whether you meet that or not. Because there's a difficult call about what the impact is going to be on the wider business. So sometimes my clients will vary appointments and they'll apologise for asking. And I say, please never apologise. You can ask anything because it's my choice how I respond to
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I like that.
And often I will accommodate them because it doesn't inconvenience me particularly to do it. And so why wouldn't I do it? Walmart in the States, they used to have a thing up outside their offices that said 2 rules. Rule 1, the customer is always right. Rule 2, if it appears the customer is not right, consult Rule 1.
Yeah.
And as long as you're making the choice that that's your boundary to satisfy your customer within reasonable demands, then that's okay. But if you're feeling, I've got to do it because they're asking me and they're not treating me well, that's where you've got a problem with your boundaries.
Yes.
Because you're recognising that you're believing that someone else is transgressing them, and you've not got a choice.
Yeah.
And you do have. It's that. I think this is a key factor in a way, is recognising that boundaries and choice, the whole idea of existential freedom, they're really bound up together. And so it's about managing your life in a way of recognising you have the choices about what you do and don't do.
Yes.
I like that because that choice, I do know so many people, and probably myself in my past, where I felt there was no other way. It's like, no, that is my boundary. That's how it is. But there is always a choice to change that boundary in that situation. And especially when I was trying the boxing days and I was really into it, it was like, I can't drink. That's my boundary. I just don't, I won't, I can't. So many good occasions I could have had just to let myself get loose a little bit, but it was just too hard.
Right.
Well, an example, I've got a client who was doing like a 365-day exercise routine, exercising every day, doing a bit of gym work every day, certain routine, and he was doing it on a day he was running a marathon. And I was saying, could you not just say that on the day you're running the marathon, that's an equivalent to doing the gym routine? And it's not recognising he got a choice. And then he got to the end of the period, and then he had 3 months of doing no exercise. I said, so how is this different now that you've not got this externally imposed routine, that you're not choosing to exercise now? So we went back on another 1-year trip,
But they're all invisible medals, aren't they? They're all invisible medals that we wear
That's a good metaphor.
with
I like
pride. Well, I mean, like Dan, he didn't drink for 20 years. And it was something really important to him. He drinks now. I've seen him drink wine and stuff. And it was really, really, really key to part of his character.
Yeah.
And the thing is, because, I mean, me and him are pretty close. I've always said to him, I said, it's kind of a medal, wasn't it? And he was like, do you know what? It really was. And it's so interesting to see someone develop and sort of come to terms with that themselves, rather than me force going, no, you've got to try this, you've got to try this.
Well, that's what you did to me.
Well, of course, yeah, but that was simply an Xbox. That wasn't anything
Thank
else.
God.
That was just that was a video game and other bits and bobs. But it wasn't wine. But I think I mean I've got an example from earlier in the week, and it was a customer experience thing, because customer experience to me is the key of everything, because it's essentially it's what makes and breaks you. And I think there was a couple of ways that I managed this. One of them was by smiling, because that immediately extinguished any sort of prickiness that was going to come from me. And also trying to understand that someone may feel attacked when someone's frustrated and they want to let you know they're frustrated. It's not always the best to let them know why they're wrong or why what they're saying isn't quite right, because for me it's difficult when someone's like, I feel attacked. It's like, for fuck's sake, okay, but it's still a justified opinion. And this guy essentially had ordered something, let's say at 12 o'clock one day. I dispatched it by 12:10 that day. Now, when it went to the post office, the tracking number that was scanned for his was a different parcel. So when he got his tracking, your tracking's landed, he checked, it had the wrong name on it, he emailed. He said, just to let you know, I've had this email. I'm not very happy about this because now someone else has got my parcel and it's 100 miles away. So I quickly looked into it. I replied to the email within a minute. And I then went back and I spoke to the post office, got everything taken care of. And what had happened is they'd scanned the wrong one. His was still on the way out there. So I tried to ring him 5 times, but unfortunately he'd put the wrong phone number on the website. Now, when you look at it, I take responsibility for the post office mistake. So I made a small mistake of not scanning the right number. He made an equal small mistake of not giving me his correct phone number. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But we're not currently equal. I'm a piece of shit and he's the king. So
As long as you know that.
yeah. So then eventually when I messaged him, because all I wanted to do was ring him to say, dude, look, I've got you back. Don't panic. And I tried to ring him, no answer. Eventually he gave me the right number. So I rang him. I said, dude, have you got his... Well, this is ridiculous. This is not fair. I'm expecting this. And, well, now it's a big problem for me. I said, what on earth's a big problem? And he said, well, I'm not going to be anymore. I said, well, we don't offer next day delivery. Yeah, well, I thought it was going to be. And I was like, listen, what's happened is it's a miscommunication and it's just a small frustration. And it's a slight change of circumstance. And I do apologise. And he, well, this has really left a bad taste in my mouth. I was like, hold on. You ordered it at 12. It was sent out at 10:10. You've got everything's gone well. I've emailed you and spoke back to you and rang and got in touch with you within a minute of you emailing. What more could I have done? And eventually... he was so adamant of being afflicted that I had to let him. And at the time when I'm on the thing, I had to do it through gritted teeth a bit because I was thinking, for fuck's sake, man. But at the same time, he needed to exercise that to then the next day he got his stuff, emailed me and said it was the best stuff I've ever received. Thank you so much. And was really complimentary. But I don't know if that's because I didn't poke the bear to the point to go, remember when you were being a prick? Remember that time when you were completely unreasonable? Because he had a lot going on that week and obviously he was quite frustrated. So nothing against the guy. It was just a circumstance. But I had to recognise a lot quicker that I needed to manage my boundaries before he realised.
And you ask yourself the question, is it going to be helpful to say that? How often do I suggest that?
Fuck me, yeah.
So I think we've had a bit of a ramble around boundaries today. Hopefully it's been of some use. I think it's recognising the autonomy of each one of us. And knowing what your boundaries are and respecting someone else's boundaries allows you to help to manage your emotions, I think, because you're able to separate out what is your stuff from what is someone else's stuff. And knowing what your own stuff is allows you to lead a more contented life, I believe. Thank you.